Hi, everyone. Ooh, is that too loud? I feel like the way that was set up, I feel like a contestant on The Voice or something. I don't know how they do that. Has anyone been watching The Voice? Yeah, okay. Um, okay, so I am really happy to be here and wanted to have a bit of a chance to talk to you about a collaboration that I did with co-editor Dr. Menka Santevsky. Oh my God, I feel so nervous. I'm going to go get the Chardonnay first and come back. Okay, and the reason that I want to talk about it is because I'm quite proud of it. I feel like what we've tried to kind of achieve in this book is trying to kind of reimagine the way that sort of traditional statutory child protection practice is conducted. And I had the opportunity to write some of the chapters in this book with the most amazing women who are not academics. They're women with lived experience of domestic and family violence, of child abuse. One woman was taken, she was taken into care when she was very young. And that chapter was probably the best thing that I think I've done in my academic career. It was really, we met weekly. It was just during COVID. It feels like a very long time ago, but we would meet and discuss what do you want to tell, the future practitioners about how they should practice. And so that was really great. And I really loved that. So I might talk a little bit about that. Okay, so anyway, there's 18 chapters. I just thought you should know. A lot of the people in the room have contributed a chapter or two to this collection. Menka and I were actually asked to do something that was a bit tricky, I thought, to take a previous edition that was written by, Emeritus Professor Dorothy Scott, who's kind of like, the leading national and international treasure on sort of child protection. She wanted to retire in the Adelaide Hills. She didn't want to do the next edition. And so we kind of felt like, oh, that's like a big task to take something on. The book was previously called Working with Vulnerable Families. So I guess one of the things that we really wanted to do is we had a few aspirational impacts in mind. We wanted to kind of have we wanted to ask authors to engage in this work who had a bit of a critical edge to their thinking. And so, as you can imagine, the first thing that we got stuck into is we don't like the title. We don't like the kind of feeling of the us and them of, there are these vulnerable families and then there's the non-vulnerable families. We really felt that any one of us at any stage could experience something that kind of knocks you out from the knees and you have to kind of carry on. So we kind of came to it with that sort of edge. We wanted to really think about how could we take this work, which is often highly stigmatizing, and get practitioners through the collaborative process of the authors that we asked to contribute to actually think about, recognizing that really when you think about it, experiencing vulnerability is really part of the human condition. And we wanted to kind of really convey that in our book. So we started with the title. We really also wanted to kind of have a book that didn't pathologize, individualize, psychologize people's difficulties. We wanted to kind of place challenges that families and individuals face within a wider social context. So we really engaged with authors and that were kind of coming at it from that more sort of critical social work edge, I guess. So really thinking about what are some of the social determinants of child protection, of child welfare. We really kind of vibed with, Featherstone in the UK, who is really about reimagining child protection and bringing it into a practice that's very much based on a humane, relational approach with people. So, and I just have a few quotes. Oh, what am I doing for time? Bernard, you're looking at the clock. What am I? 5 minutes. Okay. So I just want to kind of, so from Lauren Redmile, one of the co-authors on the chapter that I mentioned before, want to hit you with a few things that she said. Remember that I'm not just a statistic or another person who is made out to be relying on the government or services to get by. I have strengths, capabilities, dreams, as well as vulnerabilities, just like you. Try to get to know me as a person rather than judging me through the lens of being your client. Susan Brown, another co-author on that chapter, talked about what they do, they being, social workers, what they do when they come into your life is just so crucial. The work they do, it has to be done sensitively. Workers need to recognize that everyone is different. Everyone has different experiences, pains, fears, needs, and feelings. Another person said, I get so distressed just thinking about her, the social worker she was working with. She was like a foot soldier in her organization. It was like she could only respond in a confrontational and robotic way. I don't communicate anything with her now. I've been so anxious about my interactions with her that I have panic attacks. So that's what we wanted to kind of change. We wanted to think about, how do you actually practice differently. The other thing that we wanted to do in sort of with this edition of the book is we wanted to increase representation. We wanted to draw upon a wider kind of voice being represented. So not just academics, sitting in ivory towers, judging social workers. We've got lots of contributing authors who were practitioners, who were people experiencing the service landscape, and quite a few academics, but we tried. And then I guess the last thing we wanted to do, as I've said, is kind of interrogate some of the established theories. Disappointingly, we were kind of forced into having a chapter on attachment theory, but we asked the authors to go really hard at being really critical about that, really interrogate that from a feminist perspective. What does that actually mean? What are some of the really serious limitations of that theory? And so I do think that chapter, whilst we had to have it in there, does kind of interrogate some of the taken for granted assumptions about attachment theory. That's probably the only one that we got close to having a kind of psychological theory. In terms of why does it matter? I'm sure a lot of you will have seen the recent Australian child maltreatment study that just came out. So the first national prevalence study that's done on a population basis interviewed 8,500 and something people 16 and over, asking them about their experiences of childhood and coming up with huge statistics around child sexual abuse, exposure to domestic violence, experiencing neglect, being physically abused, and experiencing emotional abuse as being almost just part of growing up when you look at these statistics. And so it really matters. And so I'd encourage you to, if you haven't seen that report, you can scan the QR. Do we make these available, the slides? Yeah. You can scan the QR code. It's an incredible piece of research, and it really sets the tone for why this kind of work is really important. And I guess it kind of sets the tone for needing to change this kind of work, because the current systems that we have don't work. And so how do we actually get back to those fundamentals of practice that are about engaging with families, working with families? We've got some beautiful chapters in here from Dr. Sarah Sifchi, Dr. Lynette, Professor Lynette Riley, I believe Lynette Riley, and Irene Waddle about working with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families from a humane approach using sort of family group conferencing. And we've got a similar chapter from Dr. Sharon Roberts a social worker in New Zealand who also talks about more appropriate and culturally safe ways to work with Maori families. Anyway, whatever. Those are some of the other impacts. But my favorite impacts have to do with the fact that my co-author on chapter 2 used this in court proceedings to get her children back. Another co-author in chapter 2 who was unemployed at the time of writing it has now, is now in gainful employment working as a nurse's assistant. There were just really beautiful moments of coming together and seeing how, being involved in something like this can really make a big difference in someone's life. So yeah, so that's it. I think that's time.
Thanks so much, Sue.
Thanks.
Okay, so stay there, Sue, and I'm now going to open the questions up to the floor. And we're using the microphone just because, sorry, I should be saying this for the recording, so just so people can hear us on Zoom also. So questions that people might have for Sue off that presentation. Thank you so much, Sue. Yes.
Hi, Sue. Thank you very much for the presentation. I was wondering, what were some of your considerations and also practical approach to co-producing some of the knowledge with people with lived experiences, lived and living? I noticed you had the clarifier for both. That's question 1. And also, did you in any way engage with sort of the ethnocentrism of certain of the models, for example, the family conference model?
Yeah, great questions. Thank you. Yeah, the first one, it makes it, it sounds like it would be an easy process, but there was a huge amount of planning that went into it. We did a lot about making sure we had, we had a paid person who is an incredible kind of Mary Jo McVeigh Social Worker of the Year, trauma therapist. We had her engaged to provide briefing and debriefing to the women should they want that. We were very conscious of making sure that that was a safe and productive developmental process, that it was actually about healing and recovery in a different way. So we would meet weekly. We probably met weekly for about 6 months over Zoom. It took a long time for the group to sort of come together. It was like any group formation thing, we needed to get to know each other, establish trust, do all that kind of stuff up front before we started to kind of get into, okay, how are we going to construct this book and what are the ideas? But I really love how most of the things in that chapter are based on their lived experiences. And then we wrapped theory around that. So we started from that point and kind of connected it to theory. In relation to your second question, we absolutely tried to think about how would you go about decolonizing specifically statutory child protection practices, and specifically reached out to particular people who, we didn't want just the same old. We didn't want chapters that are about, these are risk factors, these are protective factors. We wanted more of a nuanced understanding of the complexities of people's lives as influenced by racism, sexism, poverty, homophobia, the whole kit and caboodle. So we had 18 chapters that kind of tried to decolonize that kind of old-fashioned child protection paradigm. That was a very long-winded answer.
No, it's a great comprehensive answer. Sasha, do we have any questions on the Zoom? Any other questions that we have from the floor? Yes, Bernard.
Thanks very much for the presentation. Look forward to having a look at the book. Now that you've finished the research project, and obviously there's probably other things going on following the publication of the book. So how do you maximize the chances that the ideas that are coming out of this, and you mentioned that some of them have already been applied in the court case, etc. How do you actually make sure those ideas filter through to people who need to operationalize it or actually have concrete changes happening on the ground? Like, how does that work? That interface between research and, implementation?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. I think it was kind of unfortunate about the timing of it because it was kind of at the end of COVID that it came out. So this is the first time I've publicly talked about the book. So we didn't have a book launch. We haven't really done very much.
Oh, this is the book
promotion.
launch. Surprise.
I think we need to do a little bit more thinking. I know at the University of Wollongong, Professor Joe Spangaro said that they're assigning it as their child protection core textbook. So that's my biggest early impact, but I do think Manka and I need to kind of think about how do we, get it out there and help it become more influential. Yeah.
Fantastic. Please join me again in thanking Professor Sue Heward-Belle. Thank you, thank you, thank you.